But let's turn to Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 to 14. I'm just going to look at uh, this incident that happened with Jesus. I'm just going to give you a moment. Give me a thumbs up when you have it in front of you so I know that I can start reading. Awesome. All right. So Matthew 18, verses 1 to 14. Okay, I'm just going to read it together. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe to the person through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with one eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I truly tell you, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones perish. It's an interesting passage, lots to learn and glean from those passages, and so many things we can talk about. I just want to talk about the little ones, considering the little ones. And if you read yesterday's news, there was this incident that a passenger on a flight who shared the same flight with Dhoni, the cricketer, talked about how Dhoni observed that his legs were too long for the seat. So Dhoni is in business class and this passenger is in economy class. And he observed that this passenger's seat, his legs were too long. So Dhoni came to the economy class, and told him, "Listen, your legs are too long, let's exchange seats." And sent that passenger to the business class and took his place in the economy seat. And the passenger, of course, was overwhelmed and tweeted about it and said, "Man, this cricketer never fails to amaze me. The greatness of the man, Dhoni." In fact, in many ways, Dhoni has become a phenomenon that is even bigger than cricket because of his, his natural leadership skills and his ability to inspire people. But there's something about greatness that we see in the little things, isn't it? When someone who is great, not just by the position that they hold, but in the choices that they make. And we observe the choices that they make in the priorities of the choices that they give, the priorities that they give in their choices. And when they give priorities to the things that people normally ignore and people normally overlook, greatness is seen in such ways. In fact, we often see videos about it. We often see headlines about it. Like a few years ago, there was a headline in Kerala of how President Narayanan he stood in line to cast his vote, and talking about how great that is. And so there's something about greatness that has to do with connecting with and choosing and having the courage and the boldness to choose to meet and consider the little things and the little ones. And in this passage of scripture, and begins with this question the disciples asked Jesus, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? There is this question and this incident is narrated by both Mark and Luke in their Gospels. And in both those contexts, this question is asked in the context of them having an argument as to who is the greatest among them. And obviously, there are many things that people can say. Obviously, Matthew, you're a tax collector. You're not going to be anywhere near the greatness of the kingdom. Peter, well, I don't think so. And John. I mean, there's so many things that they tend to argue with one another. Say that we did this and we did that and we are this and we are that, talking about who is greater. And Jesus, of course, tells them, listen, why you argue among yourselves? And then Jesus has this teaching about greatness. And so this question that they have, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, is in a sense them understanding that the kingdom of heaven has a different set of measurements than the kingdoms of this world, has a different set of measurements to greatness to the kingdoms of this world. When people think about greatness by the world standards, by the world that we live in, greatness might have many different connotations, isn't it? Greatness can be measured by the kind of accomplishments the person has, the position that the person has been able to have, the way the person is able to inspire others. Greatness is seen in the courage that a person has to do the right thing. There are many ways in which greatness can be seen. But there is also the sense in which greatness in this world is seen as something of an assertion that we make about who we are and what we are worthy of and what we deserve. And it's in that kind of a context where Jesus begins to deal with that attitude that people tend to have, especially people in positions who tend to force their way in and tend to say and tend to throw their weight around, so to speak. And it's in that context where Jesus says, listen, and he calls a little child among them. And a child in those days was considered, was not at all given any significance. The child couldn't do anything on their own. They didn't have much of a voice. They couldn't provide for anything. So they was not really considered significant. But Jesus brings this child and makes him stand among them. And he says to them, listen, unless you change, he says, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children. So I'm almost saying that, there's a choice that we need to make about this transformation, this conversion that needs to happen, and become like little children. You will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, of course, we know not everything about children is something that we want to emulate, isn't it? There was this video that someone made about a 35-year-old who acted like a 2-year-old. And obviously irritated a lot of people because he was throwing tantrums, he was very demanding, was not willing to share, was not willing to listen to anyone. So there are many aspects of little children that we want to say, okay, maybe you don't want to be entirely childlike, but what aspect of being little children is Jesus talking about? And so that's what he says in verse 4. He says, therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So what Jesus is trying to say here is that the measurements that we use in terms of the kingdom of heaven and who enters the kingdom of heaven is very different from the world. In the kingdom of heaven, greatness is seen in the humility, in the lowliness, in the willingness to submit to one another. That's how greatness is seen. It is not a pathway to greatness. It is not something that we do to butter people up so that they will see us and they will promote us. It is not something that we do to somehow find our own way. And so in that sense, there can be many different motivations for people to serve and to be humble, isn't it? I remember the days when when Tata Tata Indicom was a monopoly in internet, and how much they charged its customers to for internet, right? I remember paying 2,000 rupees for 20 what was that, 20 GBs, I think, or 20 20 GBs of data, right? And once the monopoly was, and if you call customer care, they're not very brash, not at all concerned about how you feel. This is our rate, take it or leave it, that kind of a thing. And once the monopoly was crashed by Jio, and with all their rates, all of these companies began to slash their rate, and they began to be very customer friendly, isn't it? Where they began to say, listen, we want you to stay. We will give you a retention discount, because we care about you. You are our valued customer. You are, and they give you all kinds of colors. You are a gold customer, you are a platinum customer, and they say these things, to make us feel special, right? You'll have an exclusive customer care representative to take care of all of your needs. Like we have so many needs when it comes to our phone, isn't it? So, but it's there is a sense in which people tend to do these things to create a facade of humility and facade of, we are here to serve you, we are here to make things better, just to have their own way, just to somehow get their own agendas through. And that is something that Jesus is really tackling, because children, if you notice, they don't have any agendas. They don't have any agendas when it comes to being humble, when it comes to just playing with one another, going and saying hi to somebody. They have no agendas when it comes to doing that. And it's just completely innocent, and it always touches our heart when a child is able to do that. And that is what Jesus is getting at. He's trying to say, listen, the humility that you exhibit, it has to be genuine humility, like that of a child. It's not something that we do to get our own way. In fact, even in Mark chapter 10, verses 43 to 45, Jesus says this. He says, instead, anyone who wants to become great among you, okay? Anyone who wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man, as Jesus, even Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. What Jesus is trying to say here is, greatness is not a pathway. Humility is not a pathway to greatness, but humility is greatness. It's when we are servants, that's when we are great in the kingdom of heaven. And this is something that Jesus is really, really getting at when it comes to the disciples. Because we see the disciples all through Scripture, right? We see them being used by God. We see them praying, and we see them going into mission trips and seeing great miracles happen through them. But we also see this tendency that we tend to have, just like all of us, to sort of measure our greatness by the things that we do instead of the person that we are and the character that we have. And that's what Jesus is trying to say. It's not about trying to have your own way. It's about the attitude of allowing God to have his way. We want to promote ourselves. We want to have our own way. We want to force our opinions, isn't it? We want others to hear what we have to say and then do what we say they must do, isn't it? That's how we try to push our way in. And Jesus says, listen, in the kingdom of heaven, it's not about who pushes their way in. In the world, that may be the case. In the world, the one, like someone said, the baby that cries loudest gets the milk, isn't it? The one who pushes their way in, the one who is loud, the one who is forceful, tends to get their way and tends to be considered great. But that's not how it is in the kingdom of God. Jesus calls for a change in direction, a change in outlook. He says we have to change and become like little children, because that is how we enter into the kingdom of heaven. It's not about forcing our way in. It's not about becoming hard. You see, and when we think about this and apply this to us in our own lives, we begin to see there are many areas in which we try to force our way in. Even though we are children of God and we are in the kingdom of heaven, but there are many areas in our lives where we are still worldly, in that sense. We still measure and we still, try to push our way through and try to force and manipulate and assert our way in a way that is not humble. I mean, it's okay to be assertive. I mean, it's good to be assertive but there is an assertion that comes from pride, but there's also an assertion that comes from making your voice and allowing yourself the opportunity to speak. And that is fine. We need to do that. We need to raise our voice. We need to allow people to hear us. We need to be able to share our views and opinions. It is something that is normal and it is necessary. But this is really talking about the motivations of our heart, the attitude of our heart, he says. And that is where we need to pay the greatest attention. And so it's something for us to think about. The kingdom of heaven is not like earthly kingdoms. In earthly kingdoms, military might and earthly wealth is what counts, isn't it? That's what counts in earthly kingdoms. It is the ability to overthrow others or to outsmart them or to outbid them, and that's what matters. The person who asserts themselves is the one who gets out. But kingdom, but Jesus' kingdom is quite different. It is the person who is like the little child who is the greatest. Being in the kingdom does not mean entering a competition for the supreme place. And it's amazing how that can even happen within a church community. It's amazing how that can even happen in ministry. How people get into this competitive kind of a nature, and we tend to see who's doing better. And we tend to measure ourselves against ourselves. But he says it's not about competition for the supreme place, but it is engaging in lowly service. True greatness, he says, consists not in receiving service, but in giving it. The genuinely humble person is the one that really counts in the kingdom. You see? So in the world is the one who is forceful, the one who is putting himself out there, forcing himself out there, and the one who has might and position. They are the ones who are considered in the world. In fact, if you notice, most attention that people give, and that's the way the world is. The most attention is given to the rich, the influential, the ones who have things. They're the ones who get the most attention. But the ones who do not have, the ones who don't have people to back them up, ones who don't, have not had the opportunity to accomplish much, they are not generally considered or treated as significant. And so this is something for us to think about. This is something for us to consider. The people around us, who may not have much, the things around us that people tend to ignore. This is the one place where we show the difference between being part of the kingdom of heaven or being part of the world. See, as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, as children of God, we are called to emulate a kind of culture that is very, very different from the world. And that culture is seen in the choices that we make, in the priorities that we have, in the genuineness of our humility towards others. And it is tempting in a way for us to mirror the world around us instead of mirroring the kingdom of heaven. It is tempting for us to do things because everybody does it. Everybody treats them that way, so I'm going to treat them that way. Everybody talks like that, so I'm also going to talk like that. Everybody says it. Everybody makes those kind of choices, so I'm also going to do it. Why not me? And that's the question we ask. Why not me? Why can't I force my way in? And that's true. But the why not is answered by the fact that you and we do not belong to the earthly kingdoms. Our culture is not of this world. Even though we are in the world, we're not of this world. We have been translated from the kingdom of this world into the kingdom of heaven, where God is the one, and his culture, his kingdom culture, is the one that primarily influences or needs to influence everything that we do. And so it does affect everything, isn't it? It does affect the way I treat my wife. It does affect the way I treat my children and how I speak to them. It does affect the way I consider people around me, the people on the street, the people who approach me, and even the regular people who call us on the phone. Those people may seem insignificant to us because they have no role to play. They may make no difference to the future of our lives. And so we then tend to think they're not really significant. But in God's kingdom, every person is significant. If you notice in the passage, Jesus goes from talking about little children, and then he's talking about little ones. You see, everything that a little child has comes from someone else. They don't earn it themselves. So being in God's kingdom is not about making a name for ourselves, but it is about receiving the name from the Father, receiving our identity from the Father. You see, and this is something that all of us struggle with. I want to make a name for myself. I want to be seen as significant. And there's nothing, of course, it's good to have a name. It's good to do things and to accomplish things. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's in that attitude of self-promotion where we try to think that our worth is attached to the accomplishments that we have. Our worth is attached to what other people say about us and how other people view us. There's an internal measuring scale that we keep preserving within us, where we tend to measure ourselves by someone else. Okay, I'm doing a little better than them. I need to get to where they are, and there's this internal measuring scale that we have, where which is motivated by this desire to make a name for ourselves. It's not about that. It's about receiving our value and our worth from the Father, just like little children. Children receive their security, their love, and their value from their parents. They don't have anything in and of themselves. This goes against the grain of, in a sense of how we want to push our way through. We aspire, as people, we aspire for greater independence, isn't it? We and that's normal. As we grow up, we want to be more and more independent, and that's good and that's important. We want to be our own person. We want to earn every bit of the respect, and we want to get further. We compete and we compare. We strive and we overtake. Even in places, and this leads us to certain cultures where even organizational structures where people may smile at your face, but they'll stab you in the back, isn't it? And that's the kind of world that we live in. But as people from a different kingdom, God is calling us to a different way of life. Look at what Jesus says. He says, anyone, this is in verse 5, he says, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. Whoever welcomes one such child welcomes me. So he moves from talking about humility, and then he talks about how that humility is seen. He talks about in this attitude of welcoming, in this attitude of openness. He says, this attitude of considering the insignificant, considering the lowly, welcoming them. Welcoming them means to hear them out. Welcoming them is to look out for them. Children were considered unimportant and insignificant, but welcoming them means that we're not going to hold on to our position. Oh, I am so and so, and I have so and so, and I have so and so position, and so we look down upon them. No. Have you noticed how people welcome children? When you welcome a child, how do you do that? Right? You tend to bend, isn't it? You tend to sort of make your eye level sort of meets at their eye level. Sometimes we go on our knees to talk to them, isn't it? Just to meet them eye to eye. It's not about looking down on them, and that's what Jesus is talking about when he says, "Whoever welcomes this little child welcomes me." He's saying this is the culture of the kingdom, where we come down to the level of people that we consider as insignificant, where we go to their level, where we try to hear them out and understand where they are and understand what they're doing. In fact, that's what Jesus did, isn't it? In Philippians 2, verse 6 to 8, it says, talking about Jesus, he says, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, and was being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even to death on a cross. And that's what Jesus did, isn't it? He came down to where we are as a human, came down to our level and lived that kind of a life. And so the God who is calling us, and I loved how Pastor Jacob Cherian said it, he said, the God who is calling us to be humble is a humble God. God himself is humble. And that's why he calls us also to be humble. In fact, that's probably why in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16, in talking about 6 things that the Lord hates, one of the things that the Lord hates and detests, the Bible says, are haughty eyes. That proud look. And this is something that nobody can see, isn't it? It's not seen on the outside. This has got everything to do with our heart and our motivations. It says, haughty eyes, something that the Lord hates. Looking down on people. You get it? And that can happen. We tend to find our worth in the things that we have, in the positions that we hold. And we tend to find our worth in such things when God is calling us to receive from him as a little child, humbly receive from him, and then welcome the little ones also around us. You see, and then from verses 7 onwards, 6 onwards, he talks about this responsibility that we have towards the little ones. He says, if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it will be better for him to, and he says, and he doesn't mention what the punishment will be, but it's a severe insult to God if we do not if we mislead these little ones are people who are easily led and easily, who do not have much. And in the world, when someone sees someone weak, someone who is not able to speak well, someone who's not able to do many things, there are a lot of people who take advantage of them. And sometimes even children are led astray by adults, who tend to have all kinds of agendas. And he says, if anyone causes one of these little ones to sin, it's a strong warning Jesus gives for people who try to use their power to lead others astray, to lead these little ones astray. He says it's better for them to, tie a huge stone around their neck and be thrown into the depths of the sea. Jesus doesn't even mention the punishment that is going to come to them, but he says it's better for you to do that. And so you can imagine the severity of something like that Jesus is trying to say. He says there are things in the world that causes people to stumble. He says that's something that we need to avoid. And he says, but woe to the people through whom they come. So he's talking about the instruments that we use to cause people to stumble, the instruments that we use that can sometimes lead people astray. He says, listen, you got to take care of those instruments. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it out. If your eyes are causing you to sin, so whatever those things are in our lives that are either leading us astray, that are causing us to stumble, that become instruments to lead people astray, those are the things that we need to cut out. And that those these are tough decisions to make, isn't it? But it's a choice that we need to make, because it's a very, very severe thing. There are things that cause people to stumble, and it's important that we learn to cut it out. He says it's better to go into the kingdom of heaven maimed. So he's saying this is all about keeping God as priority number one and allowing Him to have His way, and having no instrument in our lives, having nothing in our lives that is leading us astray or leading others astray. And it's important to take those things and throw it out. And those are tough choices, isn't it? It affects everything about our lives, affects the things that we watch, the things that we listen to, the activities that we engage in. If there are things that are leading us astray, if there are things that are leading others astray, we need to throw it out. It's something that becomes a matter of a priority, because we need to look out for the little ones. We have a responsibility towards the little ones. We have a responsibility to model, to inspire, to motivate people to the culture of God's kingdom, and not to lead them astray. And so that's something of what Jesus is trying to say, that we need to we need to he comes against this manipulation of the little ones, and he says, no, it's something that is totally wrong. We need to be the ones who protect them. We need to be the ones who lead them to the truth. We need to even be the ones who seek after them. That's why in the following verses Jesus talks about how how even if a little one strays away, how we need to go out looking for them. And he gives the analogy of a shepherd who has 100 sheep and one goes astray. He says he will leave the 99, he will go after the one. He says that is how much the Father is concerned about the little ones. It means that everybody is important. Every person is important. Every person in our society is important. And we need to give people that kind of value and that kind of respect when it comes, if we are people of the kingdom of God in this kind of a culture. We need to be able to give people that kind of a respect. We tend to give people respect based on position, based on accomplishments, isn't it? That's how we give people respect. But Jesus, in the kingdom of heaven, he says, by default, our demeanor needs to be one of humility, one of receiving, one of welcoming, one of protecting, one of going after even the one. In a world where people measure influence by the crowds, Jesus says it's not the crowds that matter, it's the one that matters. He goes after the one, and he calls us also as his children and as people in the kingdom of heaven. He says this is the culture of the kingdom. Every person matters. We go after that one who has gone away, the one who is going, who's weak, the one who is insignificant. We even value them. And my prayer is that as open doors, our culture will increasingly be one where we value every single one of us, not based on what we are able to do, or the positions, or the influence that we carry, or anything of that sort, but that we would value each one because They are loved by God. Period. Because they are created by God. Period. It's got to have nothing else to it, nothing else attached to it. And so this is something that God is calling us to do, and this is, of course, a challenge for each one of us.